Hey, what's up? Welcome back to On the Vanguard, Conversations with Women and Non-Binary People of Color in STEM. I'm your host, as per usual, Dr. Anicca Harriot, and once again, I am joined by
Dr. Arianna Long
and
Dr. Geraldine Ezeka.
And today's topic is going to be on mentorship, specifically what we like to call here, thanks to our mentoring maven, Dr. Arianna Long, Decolonized mentorship. So just as with our other shows, we're going to start off with a question. And today's question for our hosts is, when you came to grad school, did you know what to expect out of your mentoring relationships?
I'll start. Honestly, no. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't really have a true framework to use. I had had research experiences previously. I worked in the Summers Lab during undergrad. The lab was primarily run by undergraduate students and grad that were led by other grad and postdocs. So my immediate mentor was actually a more senior undergrad, and it was a phenomenal experience. They really took me under their wing. Every question that I had, I was able to get answered because I was working so closely with them. During my postbac program, the mentor that I had the most contact with was another senior graduate student because, again, the PI was just really busy, didn't necessarily have the time to put in. So I had a lot of very distant PI advisors during all of my lab experiences. So I think when I came into grad school, while a lot of people are always like, make sure you have a really strong mentor, make sure you really have a strong mentor, I took that as make sure your mentor does what you think you want to do, AKA publish a lot of papers or do interesting science that you think you want to do. And in fact, the first mentor that I had decided, or the first lab that I had decided to go into prior to being put in the lab that I completed my thesis in, I think that I wanted to be in that lab for two reasons. The mentor, we clicked. We got along really well. Our personalities meshed well. And I thought the science was something that I really wanted to pursue. But to answer your question succinctly, no. No.
I think that's what most people would say. That's definitely what I would say. I think I had an expectation. I definitely had an expectation. So did the mentoring, did I have expectations or did I have an idea of what that would look like? Yes, but it was not what I now know good mentorship looks like. It was similar to you. It's like, oh, I want someone who's publishing a lot and raking in money and like has a big group because like there's these like outward facing markers of success that you think or I thought would make for a good mentor. And that is not the case.
Not at all.
So no, I also bought into that whole like myth of the meritocracy concept. Like if I just do good work, I don't really need good mentors. I'll be fine. No, that is not true, especially when you're first gen and pretty isolated. You need all the help you can get.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What about you?
I similarly had plenty of research experiences leading up to graduate school, but they definitely didn't prepare me for really the influence that your PI will have on your progression. So I definitely will say that I did not know what to expect. I didn't really appreciate what situation graduate students are placed into as far as like finding a PI, advisor, mentor, whatever you want to call it. But I came into graduate school at the same time that I was joining the Vanguard Stem team. So I was aware that there was a bounty of research around that. So while I didn't know what to expect coming into graduate school, the way that our program worked is that we were able to do lab rotations. You didn't have to show up and know who you were going to be working. You didn't have to show up and know who you were going to be working with when you got there. So it gave us time to kind of adjust, and I used that time to kind of figure out what to expect.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. I think this is a really interesting segue into kind of what we think mentorship is or what we're told mentorship should look like, and what maybe we as a team and through engaging with research have learned what mentorship really ought to be to actually support and develop people like us. And I think you were looking at something for why that's important. You had like a research stat on why it's important for people like us to really have a better idea or understanding.
Yeah, so there are a few things. Of course, there's always resources, right? So I gave the stats earlier that essentially when it comes to Latina women, Black women, and Native women in STEM, when it comes to PhDs, we're all well below 5% of PhDs being converted to this population. And as far as resources, they find that funding makes a difference.
Of course.
And that's something that your advisor usually has the say over your funding, what you're able to apply for. They're the ones providing it to you or showing you those resources. And then specifically when it comes to like the racialized experiences that we have, there's a study that we'll link to where they surveyed over 500 students in STEM. And what they found was that Black, female, and Latina students were more likely to leave STEM before their 4th year of college, and that they, specifically Black students, sought out interactions with faculty more often than their peers. So they were looking for support more often than their peers. But in their seeking of support, were having racist experiences with those faculty. And so when they looked at the students who were leaving STEM, again, female, Black, and Latina students, what they found was that those students were leaving STEM specifically because of racist interactions with faculty. So this is something that is persistent and underlying, and is one of the things that this discrimination, what it is one of the things that's pushing folks out of STEM. And so when we talk about how low those numbers are, this is one of the reasons why.
I think the thing about all this, if we like examine the actual kind of basis of where this comes from, obviously racism, critical race theory, all that stuff. But when we really like look at the underlying culture of mentorship and that interaction between students of color and these faculty, whether or not they are of color, sometimes they uphold the same principles. And these principles that I'm referring to are these kind of white supremacist principles. This is something y'all can look up. It's a thing that's published on. There's a list, you said
nine specific tenets.
We'll talk about a couple. But kind of traditional mentorship takes this like Eurocentric, you can imagine like an old man with his disciple or whatever, like the person he wants to train to take over, and he has to select the most intelligent person and yada, yada. And it's very much directional. So just a flow from the top down, and it kind of perpetuates this idea of you are, as a mentor, you are the savior, and you are saving the mentee from their lower status, and you are telling them, and you're helping them come up, right? Right.
Sort of like teacher and apprentice model. See, whenever you talk about it, I think about like the Renaissance imagery of some person in their workshop, and they're supposed to be an apprentice just running around doing their busy work.
Exactly.
Because oftentimes when you think about these models, this white supremacy mindset of mentorship, it's how can I make this person to be like me?
It's assimilation again.
It's fully assimilation, as opposed to let me understand this individual in their lived experiences and help them work towards their actual goals. And I think that's really the difference to me between an advisor and a mentor. An advisor is someone that understands what your graduate school requirements are. They understand what you need to do in order to complete these things. And they're like, let me tell you exactly what I did, what my experiences were in my whiteness, in my heteronormative cishet white men experiences. And let me tell you to do those exact same things in order for you to succeed. I remember second, third year of grad school, my PI telling me that the only way for us to succeed was to work late nights and come in on weekends because that was the only way to get ahead of our peers.
Because that's the only way he knew how.
Exactly.
So I think that point is one that is worth making at the top of this episode. We're talking about these experiences that graduate students have and naming the system as white supremacist, and naming its impacts as racist. And I think that sometimes it's a hard thing to talk about because no one wants to admit to being those things.
Of course.
Regardless of what your identity is. And I think it's important to state that it's not about that. It is about understanding the systems that we exist in and the types of behaviors that they perpetuate, whether or not you recognize them to be so or not. So you mentioned, coming in on weekends and staying late. Like, that is something that creates gender bias. It's something that creates cultural bias. Like, if I am a person who has children, late nights and weekends might not be an option. And so
Yep.
what you're telling me before I've even done anything is that I can't succeed.
Yeah.
And that's the person who's supposed to be advising you for the rest of your experience. And the same goes for a lot of things. You know, one I see mentioned very often are like funeral services, right? And like grieving and things like that. And we are often asked to come to institutions and talk to them about their policies and give workshops and things like that. But I think it's worth mentioning is that not everybody needs a workshop.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can just start with your policies,
Right.
and look at the exclusion that is inherent in those policies. What does your bereavement policy look like? What does your healthcare policies look like? All of these things play into these systems that then the mentoring trickles down from.
Yeah, and it also relates a lot to the idea of like the individual versus the collective. And, you know, a lot of people will say, well, I'm only one person, I can't change the system. And it's like, actually, if we start to set cultural differences at the individual level, if one PI does it, then multiple PIs do it. And then collectively, suddenly you have a department that actually reflects these values that respect people from different cultures with different backgrounds, with different needs. And it starts to trickle up. It does. And people feel really frustrated and powerless, but that's capitalism. That's what it wants for you. And that's what white supremacy principles want for you. They value this lone genius, you know, single Nobel Prize winner, when nowadays we know that all those people who win are really supported by hundreds, if not thousands of people. It's about the collective. That also comes down to mentorship and like seeking multiple mentors and a community of mentors for this very reason. And also one more point about the collectiveness.
Please go off.
Yeah,
I could go off forever.
Come on, mentorship maven.
The other thing about the collective is kind of what you were saying. When the mentee comes in and you want them to get to their goals and you like take a moment to look at that, you also ought to take a moment to survey their current skills and like what they have, not just their goals, but their current skills and the things they like and the things they excel at.
Yeah.
How can we bolster that part of you? Yes, everyone needs to work on some of their weaknesses and improve those for up to a certain point. But in general, if we can focus on, you come in and you're telling me you've already been coding and you love coding and you're really interested in machine learning and you've been playing with this thing on the side. I'm like, great, let's play up that skill. Let's focus, let's get you a project with that. Is it something I already had in mind? No, but like we can get there for you because collectively speaking, when you're excelling and passionate and excited and excelling at the thing that you want to do, it's going to boost everybody else up. It's going to make that become a more common and standard practice. And also more people are going to look to you. It's really all about the collective. And I think the traditional mentorship, there's a lot wrong with it, but to me, it's really the individualistic mindset, the one-way silo direction of flow of knowledge that is really problematic.
Yeah. So you're getting into this idea of moving away from the sense of individuality, which is one of the tenets of white supremacy, and moving towards a collective and sort of decolonizing our approach in that way. So can you share with us, for the folks who maybe are not familiar or don't remember, what your tenets that you've developed of decolonization are?
Yes. So over the last year, 2 years, I've been developing the Decolonized mentorship. I recently saw you write it as anti-colonial. I like that too, because I know there's a lot of weird feelings about the word decolonize, especially from non-Indigenous folks here in this room. So take what you will, but we do have this framework that I've spent a lot of time reflecting, had a lot of mentoring experiences, both building programming and trying out different frameworks. And really, it comes down to kind of these 4 prongs. So I mentioned one, which is a collective wisdom, the collectiveness, really valuing collaboration and what everyone brings to the table and amplifying that as much as possible.
It takes a village.
It takes a village.
Yeah.
And you don't want it does.
It does.
And even if you think about like single point failures, I mean, how many of y'all have not been able to do something in your research because, only so-and-so does that and they're out of town or they graduated or whatever. Like you got single point failure issues. You just can't really depend. So collective wisdom is really carrying and supporting and amplifying the collective. The second one is abundance within all, which is definitely, these are all very overlapping, which is definitely looking at, again, the more positive, not positive, but the more everybody has abundance within. Everybody has something to offer. Whether
like in opposition to the deficit
yes,
mindset.
Yes, which is so, it's not only mentoring, yes, but deficit mindset is so often prescribed to people like us. Minorities come in underprepared from from under-resourced institutions.
Mhm.
They don't know what professional standards are.
We're under everything.
We're under everything.
Under-resourced.
Underfunded.
Funded.
Yes. And so instead of focusing on all of our weaknesses, which again play into what is actually considered professional and successful in the society, but instead of focusing on us, forcing us to assimilate and bringing us up to that standard, we focus instead on what we do bring to the table. So what is the opposite of a deficit? An excess?
Abundance.
That's what it is.
Abundance within all.
Abundance within all.
That's nice.
The third tenet examines the 3 Ps. So power, privilege, and politics. I think this one came out of the idea that for a long time, it was more common and accepted that we just don't talk about politics. We just in the workplace, we just focus on work and we just bring our full selves to work and we don't bring in our personal lives. When in reality, we can't do that. We're tired of fracturing our identities. That that drives a lot of our mental health issues, is being forced to fracture the parts of yourself to be successful in your work environment. And so if we're going to kind of integrate your personal and professional, your science identity as a person, you want to be able to talk about the things impacting you in your workspace. And so it's acknowledging that there's a horrific bill on the table right now that might impact some of your students, or acknowledging the fact that power, privilege, the fact that I'm in a powerful position as your PI, and therefore there are certain dynamics that will play out or won't, but maybe we can talk about them so we can address that. Power, privilege, politics. What am I missing? I did power. I did politics.
Power, privilege, politics.
Okay,
That's
that's 3.
3
3
Ps.
Ps. All right, great.
We can count.
We
Great.
did it. The fourth prong is intentional connection. And so it's about vulnerability. It's about seeing us all as human. It makes it so much easier for me to disclose to you, especially as someone who maybe is in more power than I am, that, hey, I'm really struggling. My grandma's not doing well and it's hard and I think I need to go home, but I'm also just having trouble focusing. It's so much easier disclosing that to someone who has also shared with you a struggle. I'm not saying we all need to come out here and spill all of our personal tea with your students and your faculty, whatever, but making an intentional point to share vulnerabilities, but also celebrations. Hey, I'm getting married this weekend. My paper got accepted. And just building in these points of contact as kind of a regular part of your culture in your group. And this extends beyond the lab, it extends beyond graduate education. Just building that as part of your culture means you get to share in things and connect with each other. And research shows that when you share that vulnerability, and this is annoyingly true, when people from different walks of life, whether it's identities, experiences, whatever, share in vulnerabilities, positives and negatives, highs and lows, you understand each other more. And you end up rooting for each other more when push comes to shove, when things like bills are on the table. And so if we can intentionally build that connection a little bit more, we can kind of make this whole experience more humane and not traumatize people, make sure people leave feeling supported. I'd rather you take a little longer to graduate, or we work a little harder, or maybe I take on less students and don't publish as often because I really want to support the few people I do have in my group. So these are our 4 tenets. I have so many different ways of us talking about them and different ways they can manifest, please.
Okay, but this last one, though, just has got my brain percolating on the cry chair.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So there's a professor
Really
in our
look at me
department. There's a professor in our department.
No.
Cry.
The cry,
I thought
tears.
You meant, cryogenic.
Yeah, I thought so too.
No. Not cold.
Chair and sob.
The physical cry, your eyes out chair that you sat in. So there was a professor, shout out to Dr. Wilson, phenomenal person. If anyone was a mentor to me during grad school, he was it. Of course you guys too, but senior person. I remember my first few weeks in the lab that I was in, he gave me the book, The Art of War, and he was like, read this. This is how you win the war and not the battles throughout grad school. Really internalize it. And I just remember I had gotten a really, really sad phone call about a friend passing away. And I never want anybody in my lab to ever see me emotional. But I didn't know how to hold the emotions in because it was something that was just so shocking. I didn't expect for it to happen. It was yeah, so I went to his office and he was just like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "No, I just got word that a friend passed away. Can I just sit here and cry?" And he was like, "Take as long as you need." And I sobbed in the cry chair. And it was such a great, we had created such a great rapport that even prior to me sobbing in this cry chair, I had come to his office when I had cool data to show. Before I even showed my PI, I was like, "Oh my gosh, look at this Western blot that I did. Isn't it beautiful?" And we had just gone back and forth chatting about his lived experiences, how he had to work as how he was in a band and worked his way through graduate school
That's
in a
amazing.
band. And it was just awesome. Like this book began even before getting in the lab. We used to sit in core course. And I remember the first day I ever talked to him, we were sitting in the front row in class and I had a question. And y'all know me, okay? I'm gonna be me through and through. I was like, well, and we had like these breaks, and I was like, well, since she's just standing over there, can you answer my question real quick?
That was what she walked up.
Since you're
just standing over here, let me ask you a question.
I was like, let me ask you a question. He busted out laughing, and it was like, white on rice.
Still, even the cry chair is just a perfect example of like, he already saw you at your lowest.
Yeah.
And he still accepts you and sees you as a scientist, and it allows that sort of rapport, right?
Yeah.
That's not only possible, but I really do think one of the fastest and easiest and most human ways of building that connection and making it so people can be excited or sad.
He was a mentor.
I definitely didn't have the same relationship with this person, but I can definitely speak to this sort of like dedication to intentional mentorship and to your point, intentional connection.
Yep.
So he was at that time he was the department director for the biochemistry department at our university. And if you were a first year student, after your first exam, everyone got called into his office just to talk about it, ask you how it went.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like, you did well, or you did poorly.
Wow.
You did however you did, but you came into his office to talk to him about it. When it was time to select who was going to be on your committee, he has to sign off on it.
Yep.
And you can just email somebody a form to sign, but you had to go to his office to get it signed because he wanted to tell you about the people who were on your committee.
Yep.
And whether or not it was a good idea
intentional.
to do that.
Yes.
Yeah. And so there were so many instances of that again, I didn't have that same relationship. I, worked across campus.
He was also close proximity to me. Yeah.
Had that like intentional mentorship from this individual. But that leads me into the question that I maybe want to pose to you. So we mentioned these tenets of decolonized mentorship, and those definitely weren't created in a vacuum. They come from research that we interacted with. So I wanted us to all go around and talk about maybe if there are, you mentioned a book. I know there are other citations from other Black women and women of color, non-binary folks of color that we've worked with over the time. So can you talk about like where have you learned about any of this from, and even if that's just an individual? So we can start with you, Geraldine.
Oh, I totally was hoping we started on the other side.
No, I would have too much. So
Go ahead.
Some of the books that I know that are incredibly helpful, Hooded by Dr. Malika Grayson.
Yes.
It is a beautiful framework of just how to maneuver throughout grad school, how to get a successful mentor. Anicca, you wrote a really great article. I'm trying to remember the title of it.
It's called Mentoring Across Intersections of Identity.
And it was really beautiful because I think it beautifully laid out how you and your advisor were very different people, but he accepted you and accepted who you were as a scientist coming into your lab with the experiences that you desire to have, with the science that you decided to pursue. And I think that was incredibly powerful. And I also spoke to the director of our program. He was an incredible mentor for me. And to the point of intentional connection, I worked with a different community organization called Fuel the Kids, and we used to have these school drives. Every single year that we did the school drives, him and his wife gave me books, school supplies for the kids, always supported, never made me feel like it was a waste of time. So just that continued support in everything that I was doing was really where I got a lot of education and support from. And then friends, peer mentors. I really leaned on the people that just had more experiences or could educate me in the different things, very much like y'all too. Shout out to y'all.
Yeah, thank you.
Back at you.
As far as resources go, someone who has been in a lot of Vanguard STEM content we've produced in the past, Dr. Baronda Montgomery.
Yeah.
So she also has her book, Lessons from Plants, but on her website, she's always writing these sort of like think pieces on mentorship and her experiences there.
Can I just segue real quick? 3 seconds, I promise. Dr. Baronda had this phenomenal like blog post that was out of her book, A Lessons from Plants, that was titled, "The Best Mentor is a Healed Mentor." And I was just like, ooh.
That hurts.
It really does, because you think about the trauma that you may or may not have experienced having been poorly mentored and not wanting to persist that in your future mentorship relationships with other people that you're trying to.
Sorry, this reminds me of that person you were talking about when we gave this workshop at SACNAS. And we gave this workshop on these tenets, and we asked, it was more focused on mentors, and we asked them first to think about these tenets and how they experienced them as mentees, but then also whether or not they maybe violated these tenets as mentors. And it took a whole lot of chutzpah, a whole lot of confidence. This woman stood up and was like, I actually realized that I was telling my students that they weren't dressing professionally.
Yeah.
And by doing that, I was perpetuating the assimilation narrative, and I was actually working like against these principles. And that, I remember, took a lot of reflecting on her, but it's true. I feel like the best mentors are the people who can sit here and reflect and say, "Ooh, maybe I messed up a little bit there," and then trying to actually improve. I feel like a lot of people feel like they arrive at mentorship once they get a title. Yeah. So you were saying Baronda
Montgomery for sure, Ashley Henderson, and then not specifically on mentorship, but I'll say Kim Tallbear, and her musings on like STEM culture in general and like objectivity have really shaped my approach to like, why do we do science this way in the first place? And then sort of backwards thinking from there of like, what is the impact of mentorship in perpetuating these sorts of standards of beliefs? So yeah, when it comes to Vanguard STEM, we're always looking at like Black feminist writers and thinkers, Indigenous scholars to sort of shape our own practices. But yeah, those are the resources for me. And as far as people, of course, I love my peer mentors. Definitely our founder, Dr. Jedidah Eisler, was a huge mentor for me. The person who sort of introduced me to this bounty of literature. Chanda Prescott-Weinstein's another one. And my PI in my graduate studies was a fantastic mentor. And I don't know, we had an interesting relationship because I always felt like I could be very open and honest with him, and that he was very receptive of that. But we didn't really like talk about the impact that had on us as individuals. And I know it had a really big impact on me. And I remember doing my defense. He gave like this long introduction.
Yeah, beautiful.
And he was up there. I did not know what he was going to say. There's a video. I'm probably making all kind of faces. But he was a wonderful mentor to me in a lot of different capacities. And I know that he feels that he learned from being my mentor. And that's something that was really impactful for me to hear from him.
That's beautiful.
That is beautiful.
That's such a, like a, not mature. What's the word I'm looking for? Like the fact that he was able to reflect on that and come to that conclusion really speaks volumes to his character.
Yeah.
Because everybody can make mistakes and do harmful things. And I'm sure he did in the past. But like the fact that he is watching it and recognizing it and reflecting on it and thinking about it, that is, if there was anything I could ask any mentor to take away from this podcast or any of the work that we do, it's that you must constantly reflect and learn and grow.
Yeah.
And it's really, really wonderful. Yeah. Is it my turn?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
This is not an easy question. So I think in terms of what really influenced me and like radicalized me were two things. One, it was the Carlone and Johnson 2007 seminal paper on STEM identity, science identity, and women of color. And essentially they boiled down the key factors to persistence for women of color in STEM. Kind of come down to a couple different things, but one of them being meaningful others. We've talked a little bit about that in other podcasts, but what I really noticed in that was meaningful others weren't just the people who were already scientists, again, like the direct mentors that you're traditionally thinking of. Meaningful others can also be your community, your family, your peers. And if they can see you as a science or a STEM person, then that really helps you. And I just remember reading that for the first time and digesting that and thinking, wow, that's really interesting. Like not just these people higher up, but all these other people in your life. And then that radicalization took a step further. When I joined grad school, I came into this pre-summer program like y'all did, to get started on research before classes, that whole thing. And it was for like all marginalized people in PhDs, not just STEM PhDs. And so it was like, they basically put together all the people who also ended up leading most of the protests later on. So we're all friends. Joke's on y'all. And they link you up with peer mentors who went through that same program maybe a year or two before you. And it was the first time I'd been officially given a peer mentor. There were a couple here and there, but this was like a real one that was in my department who is now a good friend. And that experience was lovely, but she and I kept talking about how powerful it was to have peer mentoring relationships. And we're just like, wow, we're learning from each other. We're sharing resources. Oh, you don't have to reinvent the wheel because I already did that and I'm going to share that with you. Like, that's great.
That's powerful.
And so her name's Dr. Katie Rodriguez-Wimberly, and she and I went on to form a peer mentoring program, like an official one in the department, to kind of do a lot of the collective part of these tenets that I was mentioning. So sharing that hidden knowledge of that weird 3-month or 2-month gap that you might get in financing at some point during your career, or how we're all dealing with time management with all these expectations. And I just kept seeing the wildest part about this program was that the people who kept showing up, it was optional, but the people who kept showing up were almost consistently the people of color.
Yeah.
White people left. All the people of color kept showing up. They had community, they had this mentorship, they had friends, and it became this moment where we all saw each other as resources of support. No one person was better or more advanced than the other. We all had something to offer. And once that happened and we started basing that program off of literature, once that happened, I just became fully radical in my mentoring beliefs, believing in having hundreds of mentors. So the answer to your second question of one person, I do not have that. I have way too many, and it would just be horrible for me and on the inside to even name a single person.
But kind of like imagine the amount of people of color who sought mentors that looked like them, that they literally just could not find them in their area of expertise. If it wasn't for my good friend and mentor introducing me to who is now my career mentor, a Black woman in biotech, who has had entrepreneurship experiences, who is now a really high position at a pharma company, I would not have ever had. And it's not just that she's a Black woman in biotech. She is a personable, Black woman in biotech. She embodies my essence. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, somebody that not just looks like me, sounds like me, dresses like me, gives energy off as me. I'm like, oh my gosh, this exists.
Yeah.
And now I can learn from you. And now I can learn how to maneuver in this essence as myself in this very hetero, cishet white man industry, but like fully embodying who I am.
Can I ask how you met her?
Surprising, a phenomenal white man introduced me to her.
Okay, like online or
no. Okay, so he was a graduate student. They do exist. He was a graduate student who I rotated in his lab, and so we developed a really great friendship from that. He had gone on to a company that she was working at. They both were working at, and he was like, "Listen, you're about to come to Boston. I, as a Jewish white man, cannot tell you the lived experiences of a Black woman in this company. You need to go talk to her because she's the only person that will really understand from her perspective and be able to tell you the truth about her experiences."
There's a reason I'm asking. Did you end up meeting with her first on Zoom, or did you meet her in person?
I met her first on Zoom.
Okay. That is so important to me because that I feel like segues into something else I wanted. So a couple people I will give shout outs to. So you mentioned Ashley Hutterson, I think also Simone Hyder Adams. They do the work on kind of online spaces.
Yeah.
And one of the other reasons that the Decolonized mentorship framework is so important is because a lot of these principles overlap to emphasize that we are often isolated.
Yeah.
And sometimes the only way for us to connect with mentors or people who do what we want to do and look like we are and act like we are and are successful is through the internet.
Yeah.
And devaluing that sort of relationship and only valuing your one-way in-person relationship that's officially on paper really kind of disrespects the amount of support, love, growth that you get through these other online spaces and online mentorship communities. And I feel like that's not talked about enough.
Yeah.
I will say to that point, and I'll give a trigger warning for this statement. Before I found Vanguard STEM, so I went to an undergraduate institution that I will not name, and you will very rarely ever catch me naming that. I mean, you can look it up; it's on the internet, but won't hear it from me. But at my undergraduate institution, it was a private Christian college, and as a queer Black woman, that alone was like incredibly isolating, let alone like the individual experience that I had on that campus. And I was so isolated, like in this state of depression, like considering self-harm, like all of these sorts of things. And that's when I found Vanguard STEM.
Wow.
And I like literally down to the white women that I was like living with had created a hostile environment to, like, I was never in my apartment where I was living, which is student housing. I would have to shower elsewhere.
Wow.
So when I was in my apartment on campus, I would just be in my room. But once a month, put on my little purple t-shirt. No joke. I'd get dressed up, go sit on, at that time, the Vanguard STEM series that was going on was on, I don't remember the name of the platform, but it was similar to like a Zoom webinar where you have your pinned speakers, but you can still see everyone else in the audience. They kind of placed you to look like you were in an audience. And I go put on my little outfit, go sit in front of my computer. And it was like the only time that I felt like I was in community with other people who shared my experience. And there were mentors who I could look up to and seek out to help me along the process that I wanted to go in. And it was so meaningful to have that. And I mean, I can't even say where I would be without that experience alone of that online community of mentors.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like being able to be connected with one another has been definitely the thing that has kept me in this path.
Sustained you.
Yeah.
Sustained all of us, honestly.
All of us. Would not be here without that.
Yeah.
And then having those lucky moments where we can actually see each other in person, like at conferences, whether diversity focused or not. Again, just kind of priceless moments of mentorship, because mentorship, right, it doesn't have to be sustained over a long period of time. Just having that one interaction with one person can completely change your path.
Exactly.
And so also honoring that as a mentor, which we all are, honoring that sometimes just that one conversation that you have with that undergrad who's just so excited to meet you, that can change their life. It's wild. It's wild. The imposter syndrome be doing its thing, but like it's real. We are in that position that they want to be in.
Yeah. There were these two early grad students that were coming in as we were kind of exiting. And we used to have these little things called sip and chats, where we would sip and talk about our lived experiences as we were maneuvering through grad school.
Shout out to Dr.
Dante Johnson
for organizing this from our first
That's
year in grad
amazing.
school
throughout the entire,
taking notes.
It was a phenomenal time, but there were these two early graduate students. Now, Dr. Anicca and I have always had a very great rapport, literally since day zero of graduate school. And there were these two other students that acted really similar to us. And they were like, we can't wait to be just like y'all. And we were like,
it was a moment, because they didn't say it to us. Geraldine and I, we were doing the things that we did. And we were about to leave, and they were just watching us. And I heard them behind us be like, is that what we're going to be like when we're... It was like,
oh my gosh, y'all want to be like us? But it was really precious and just really heartwarming to be recognized as someone to even look up to.
So that takes us to where I think I kind of wanted to maybe get some final comments. So in addition to, we talked a lot about our experience as mentees, but we're moving into a space now where we're more clearly and more regularly mentoring other folks. And through Vanguard STEM, we recently launched our community mentoring program, which is called Unbound. And we call it Unbound based on the seminal paper, The Double Bind, by Dr. Shirley Malcolm. And that was really a pioneering paper talking about the intersections of race and gender and the interplay of that in your experience in STEM. But I bring that up to say this Unbound Community Mentoring Program moving into this mentoring space, I want to talk about maybe some things that we've learned,
Mm.
maybe things that we've seen in our program that maybe we weren't expecting, just some commentary about the fact that mentoring is a learning process, just like being mentored is.
Yeah.
And maybe we can close out with some commentary like around our experiences there.
Just with Unbound?
Unbound or any
in general,
like mentor. You're now mentoring.
Yes.
What is it like?
It's hard. Mentoring is hard, like especially if you want to do it in this intentional way.
Yeah.
That's the hard part, and that's the part that like I knew was true, and I knew when people were kind of like recoiling at the things we're asking them to do, that's a lot of work. Yeah, it is, but this is like someone's livelihood.
Yeah.
And so like I have, especially when I have women of color mentees that are like long-term, like through a research project or something, it feels so precious to me.
Yeah.
It feels like, oh my gosh, I'm so honored, but also terrified to have this kind of like responsibility for you because like I want you to succeed and feel supported and all those things. So it takes a lot of work, and it took a lot of, and takes a lot of reflection. We do lots of moments of reflection on how our relationship is going. We do reflection on like where their goals are at. I ask them, we talk a lot about personal things, and I share in a lot of my personal things. Maybe some of them too much. I'm learning that boundary, but that intentional connection is so much more important to me because then my mentees are able to come back and say, actually, I'm having a really tough time. I can't do that this week. Instead of meeting at the beginning with a lot of my mentees, I notice when we're not there yet with our trust and our connection, they will not come to me when they need help. They'll just struggle silently for a week until our next meeting and be stuck on point 0, not even step 1. Yeah. Well, I wanted to figure out and prove to you that I could do this. Yeah. That's not what you're here for, babe. You're here to learn. You're here to grow. Let me help you. So it's been really, really hard in that way, but really rewarding in that it feels like with a lot of my mentees, I like, it's hard to gauge the metrics, right? And that's like a whole other conversation. How do you gauge the success of this relationship? Yeah. I don't want to say it's successful because they all go on to grad school. Like that's someone else's metric. That's not mine. To me, the point of success is that a lot of them come back and want to share their success with me. Yeah. That's all that matters to me, that they're happy and that they're excited to come tell me and share it with me because they'll know that I will be happy for them. Related to Unbound, this has also been a whole new journey. This is a different type of mentoring program.
Absolutely.
Unbound is our community mentoring program where we take in undergrads, usually from community colleges or smaller universities in their kind of first or second year of school.
MSIs, students.
MSIs, thank you.
All of them.
Yeah. And I think the whole point was to bring in outside mentors to kind of bolster their community of support and their mentoring network. And I think the hardest part that I forgot is that not everyone comes into grad school or undergrad even knowing exactly what they want to do.
Yeah.
And so balancing that flexibility for your mentees while also trying to give them direction is so hard.
Yeah.
I think that it kind of speaks to maybe a greater realization of mentorship is that like we were all there at some point.
Exactly.
And it's so easy to forget what you were like at that stage. Because when I hear the range of things that they're interested in, I'm like, what happened 2 weeks ago? When it was a surgeon, now it's an entrepreneur.
Yeah, come on
Where
now.
did this come from? But
to be fair, you thought you were going to be an astronaut cardiologist, and you low-key are doing all of those things. So if she wants to be a surgeon entrepreneur, baby girl, go off.
I mean, all of the things, please be them.
Yes.
For sure. But I think that shifting interest, and it took some reflection, I guess, again, on my part too, to even remember that's kind of like where I am now, right? It's like, am I going to be a professor? Ask me next week.
Right.
Yeah, that's real.
It's real. But I also think I'm just now realizing maybe this is also a plus of the kind of programming that we're doing in that we're exposing them to different paths and options. And maybe that's part of the reason.
Yeah.
You want to talk about mentorship as a learning experience? Did you have any like anecdotes?
Yeah,
there?
I'm actually about to embark on a really interesting mentorship experience. So my job has a summer fellows program where they invite different fellows from different universities from all over the world, and they engage in this venture creation experience. And honestly, they're kind of thrown into it, more or less. We jokingly talk about how intense it is, but it is really intense. And I remember talking to the director of the program how I wanted to kind of be a place of solace for these students, for these different academic trainees as they're coming into this program. But I also want to be able to balance that place of solace with still providing them and equipping them with the tools that they need to be successful. And so several students have already reached out to me for one-on-one lunches because I encourage all of them to do so, just so that you can talk, ask me questions, whatever it is you want to ask. There is no question that you should leave. There is no question that you should leave unanswered. Come into our office, sit in my cry chair and cry if you need to, but like, let's chat about it. Let's chat about these experiences, but let me also work towards empowering you in this. This is not hard, but it's not impossible. This is really hard, but it's not impossible,
Right.
and you're capable of doing so.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I think we're all learning how to be good mentors.
Yeah.
And I think we're coming at it with this wealth of knowledge on how to do things to make things better for the folks coming in behind us.
Yeah.
And there are probably folks who are watching this who are already mentoring,
Of course.
who maybe didn't have access to those resources, know that they were even out there. And so I think the final thing that I wanted to talk about with this and just touch on briefly is that it doesn't always go right.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth talking about not only how to do it right, but how to address it when you've done it wrong. And so, we always put our resources down below. And so there's this one psychologist, he's a professor at University of Washington in Seattle. And his name is Dr. Kirk Honda. He has podcasts, YouTube, and of course his articles, peer-reviewed articles. And one thing that he has been focusing on recently that I've been engaging with is this content around apologies. So he has these 11 core tenets of what makes a good apology. And I don't have those up, and we can list them or link to the resource directly below. But one thing that he said that stuck out to me and made me actually want to include it in this conversation was that I think what he said was that good apologies are just. But in general, that apologies should be just, right? And so when we're talking about anti-colonial frameworks, the point is justice at the end of the day. And so we're not always going to uphold all of these tenets. We all make mistakes and have already made mistakes. And so I think it's important to remember that when that happens, the folks who are wronged deserve an apology, whether you had malintention behind what you were doing or not. And that if we're moving towards justice, that also is a necessary step in changing these systems, because they affirm that a wrong has been done to begin with. And then at their core, if it's a good apology, not only do they validate your experience that a wrong has been done to you, but a good apology, and this is part of Dr. Honda's research, should also include a plan to do better later. So it requires a lot of work and recognition and reflection, but specifically the type of work that we're talking about doing, like is that plan moving forward once you've acknowledged maybe some of your shortfalls.
And that kind of work, I feel like, tells the other person that you're worth that work. It reminds me of Dr. What's his name again?
Wilson.
Dr. Wilson. It reminds me of Dr. Wilson meeting with every single student. You are worth my time. Regardless of how well you're doing this program, you are worth my time. You are worth an apology and me doing better. And that sort of validation and connection is just, healing. Intentional connection. The best mentors show up healed.
The best mentors show up healed.
Exactly.
Oof, mic drop.
Dr. Montgomery.
You're right there.
Okay.
So for all of those resources and more, you can always check the comments, descriptions below. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for
at
watching.
Vanguard Stem on everything. VanguardSTEM.com for the long form content.
Yeah, that's right. We got all this content, all the articles and whatnot on our mediums.
Thank you so much for tuning in on our show. We'll see you next time.